Hi everybody, and welcome to Hospitality 3004. Hopefully you've already taken a look at the welcome video posted under the announcements. This is your first official video for week one. We're just going to kind of lay the foundation here for what is strategy, kind of a definition of that. And then I'm going to give you a bit of an example just to sort of have something to formulate a basis for this class on. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll get into the actual definition of strategy here. All right, so the definition. I took this from a couple of different textbooks that are typically used with strategy, particularly in hospitality management. All of them use a very similar variation of this definition, but this is probably the most comprehensive one, so we'll just use this one for today. So the definition of strategy is those decisions that have high medium-term to long-term impact on the activities of the organization, including the analysis leading to the resourcing and implementation of those decisions to create value for key stakeholders and to outperform competitors. Ugh, okay, that is a mouthful, I agree. So let's look at that a little bit more bit by bit to make things a bit easier, Okay, so first of all, we've got the decisions. So when you guys get out into the working world and you are managers, this is part of what you're going to be doing. You are going to be making a variety of different decisions. Now, whether you work on the corporate side of things as opposed to the operations side of things, that's really going to impact this bit here, which is the medium term to long term. Now, obviously, somebody in operations is typically a lot more day-to-day. However, at the same time, you do have to think about how may this be affecting the company long-term. It's actually quite interesting for those of you who do get into the corporate side of things, and even for those of you who are in any level of management, you're going to hear the organizations you work for talking quite long-term, okay? So 5 years is rather short-term. Most companies know what they're going to be doing, or at least they have plans and they have ideas for what they want to do in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that sort of thing. So I can guarantee that the hotel companies 20 years ago were talking about how they wanted to get into China. And now the world is a little bit strange at the moment, but if I was doing this class with you a year ago, I would have been telling you that every day a new hotel opens in China. I have no idea what's going on right now because things are a bit strange. But yeah, all of the foreign, the international hotel companies were fighting to get into China, and they were wanting to do that for many, many years. So this was a long-term plan that they had. So every company talks about, what kinds of mergers and acquisitions they want to do, what kinds of products they want to develop, that kind of thing. So they're really taking a very thorough look at the organization. Those of you who took Tourism 1000 with me a few years ago, I believe I did a case study with you guys on the merger and acquisition the merger between Marriott and Starwood. So those things are happening all the time these days, and that's how a lot of these companies become even more prevalent in the industry. And I'm actually going to give you a Starwood example a little bit later today. Okay, so they're making these decisions, for the company, and a lot of that has to do with creating value for key stakeholders. So obviously the company, major stakeholder, the people who own shares in that company, they are stakeholders. The customers are stakeholders. The other companies that they work with are stakeholders. So they're constantly looking at not just what's going on themselves within the company, but how are they going to be affecting all of these other individuals or organizations or whatever that are working with them, and how are they able to continually create value. Because if they run into a problem with a stakeholder or they lose a customer segment or whatever it may be, this leads to the downfall of companies. And again, the world is a little strange at the moment. Industries are not acting as they normally have for the last 40 years that I've, watched. So it's a little difficult to talk about some of these things at the moment, but going forward, they're certainly looking at keeping their customers happy and how do they retain them, because they're going to be very dependent on them for their future success. Okay, so we create our value for stakeholders. And a lot of that has to do with, okay, well, we've now looked at our stakeholders. How do we implement these decisions in order to ultimately outperform our competitors, okay? So you guys will always know who your competitors are, who, is on the horizon, who could become a competitor that you need to be concerned about. So these are all things that you have to take into account when you're working for these companies and when you're in any kind of, strategy type meetings. So what I wanted to talk to you about, for an example, I wanted to talk to you about Westin. So in 1999, Westin is part of Starwood, and of course now Starwood and Marriott, they are partners. So in 1999, Westin was a brand of Starwood, and they were heavily dependent on business travel. And what they decided to do was they decided that they wanted to, work with these business travelers to make them even happier with their stay. And so they did a lot of customer analysis, they did a lot of product testing, and they looked at the fact that there was a lot of research coming out about, people who, when they're away from home, they don't sleep as well. People just don't sleep as well in hotels. And of course, there's all this research that shows a good night's sleep is so important. It's the best service that a hotel can provide. So Westin decided that they were going to make this a priority and make sure that people had the most comfortable rooms, so forth and so on. And they ultimately came down to, okay, well, we think that maybe we need to improve on our bed to make sure that people are getting a good night's sleep. So they went through all of this product testing, and I've probably mentioned to you before, if I was ever to go back into industry, I would probably go and do, product research or market research, because it's really cool the way they do these sorts of things. And if you have a flair for research, it's really interesting. So what Westin did is they actually did all of this testing, all of this research. They took something like 35 beds from all of these different chains, like 30 or 40 different hotel chains. They tested them, and they developed their own bed called this Heavenly Bed. Okay, so let me read this. So Westin developed its prototype all-white Heavenly Bed with a custom-designed pillow top mattress, goose down comforters, 5 pillows. Apparently that was the magic number. 3 crisp sheets ranging in thread count from 180 to 250. So they went ahead and they developed this. After all this product testing, they launched it. Let me go ahead. I'll show this to you. Actually, let me give you the background first. So they launched it actually on the day that they launched this. They also rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And so as the CEO was there at the New York Stock Exchange, they had all of these heavenly beds lined up and down Wall Street, where, of course, the stock exchange is. So I think it was like 20 or 30 beds all along Wall Street. They put another 20 or 30 beds in New York's Grand Central Station. And when the CEO rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, he said, "Work like the devil, sleep like an angel." Okay? And then, of course, they ran this marketing campaign at the same time. And part of the marketing campaign, I tried to find it for you guys, but it went off of this idea of who's the best in bed. Okay. Now, obviously, things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. So here's one of their current programs. Oops, let's go ahead and play this. Okay, so that's a current Heaven Westinly bed commercial. Now, when they first launched this years ago, they did a big marketing campaign. As I mentioned before, the stock exchange, they rang the bell and everything. They had a heavenly bed floating down the river, the Mississippi River. They had a bed at the Space Needle in Seattle, and then they also ran a television campaign in which they used the phrase, "Who's the best in bed?" So they did this big marketing campaign to let people know about the product and encourage them to come stay at Westin. However, an unintended consequence ended up being that within the first week, everybody who slept in these beds just thought they were absolutely amazing. And so they all called up Westin and said, "I want to buy the pillows, I want to buy the sheets, I want to buy the bed. How do I get it? And Weston kind of went, what? We weren't expecting that to happen. But it was an awesome, result. So they quickly realized that they needed to offer this to people because that's what they were demanding. So within the first 3 years, Weston sold over 20,000 pillows, over 3,500 bed sets, linens, and then they branched out into like robes and slippers and bath products and all of these sorts of things. So how did this happen? They were listening to their customers who said, we're not getting a good enough sleep. We want to sleep better. So they started thinking outside of the box. How do we make people more comfortable when they're not home, when they're sleeping in hotels? They wanted to be able to compete, okay, and do better than their competitors. They wanted to ultimately dominate the market. So that's what caused them to launch this bed. And as a result, people loved it. And the next thing you know, they had a retail application. And now they have a whole nother product line. As a result of just trying to make people happier in the hotels, they've now branched out into products as well. So, okay, so there you have it. That's kind of the intro, example, introduction to what is strategy. I think this word is thrown around way too much in general. It's kind of one of those buzzwords that's very overused. So I wanted to make sure you guys understood kind of where this fits in, what your role would be with regard to strategy and strategic management when you get out in the working world, and just kind of give you a very simple introductory example of kind of how this was implemented. So anyway, that is that. I know that you have several other things that you need to be looking at for the first week, but there you go. First lecture of the semester done. Woohoo! Congratulations. All right, thanks guys. See you next time.